Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. I'm going to give you a warning that this is not a standard episode where I talk about a specific news story, but rather a trend I'm seeing that I am not a fan of. This all stemmed from a Discord announcement that was made a couple of weeks ago, where Discord is going to be enforcing age verification across the world by requiring people to show their government ID cards. Discord claims that this is to ensure minors are not using the platform, and they've already done a trial run of this in, I believe, both the UK and Australia. And in Australia, Discord also managed to have a data breach of 70,000 government records people were required to show them. And they claim this was the fault of a third party, but ultimately, that is data that Discord themselves is asking for and collecting. You can somewhat shove the responsibility off to the third party as a scapegoat, but ultimately, you are the one paying for their services. It is your data. You are responsible for protecting it and for vetting that vendor to make sure they are using proper security protocols. Discord has since rolled back their plans to do this whole age verification thing because they got a lot of criticism for it. They started off by saying people would be required to verify their age only if they're suspected of being minor, and then rolled it back to say that 90% of people would never have to do this. And now they seem to be postponing it entirely, with no updates on when this is actually happening. I have problems with age verification on websites in general when it comes to showing some form of government identification. I think it's a complicated issue, and I don't have the answers for how to solve it exactly, but I have some things I want to talk about as it relates to this topic. Age verification for apps and websites is becoming a lot more common to prevent minors from accessing potentially harmful content. This is good in theory, but ultimately, I honestly think it does more harm to adults and those minors themselves than it does good. Children are on social media younger than ever. I am a youth, you could say. I am 23 years old, and even I wasn't really on websites like Facebook and Instagram when I was a child. I was on Club Penguin and Animal Jam and Free Realms. Does anyone remember Free Realms? Anyways, little virtual world type games where you can have your own avatar and talk in a little chat that's heavily censored and play games and meet friends. It wasn't really social media, it was just an MMORPG for children. And honestly, we need to see more of those back. Partially for selfish reasons, because I loved Club Penguin, I was really good at that Water Ninja game, and I like just playing little mini games as a fun little penguin, but also so that kids can kind of have their own space to have a more whimsical, child-friendly social media experience. You would still sometimes get inappropriate chats on those types of websites, but it was pretty heavily moderated, and people had to use a lot of code words to get around the censorship. You couldn't just swear or say suggestive things. On Instagram and TikTok, that basically doesn't exist. There's not really this separation that exists between content for adults and content for children. It's treated as the same thing, and none of it's really censored, not to the extent that, websites made for children are. So kids do end up seeing wildly inappropriate things. And that is a problem that I think we do need to consider. Many governments around the world and many websites themselves have taken it upon themselves to place restrictions. Of course, many restrictions for websites already exist, so what has to be done is required identity verification so that people don't just lie and say, yes, I'm under 18, I was born in 1872, as many people did when they were 12 years old. I understand where they're coming from with this, but it's not a very good idea for several reasons. First of all, it's the death of anonymity. A very basic part of internet safety is being able to make an account and be completely anonymous, not having people know who you are. There's safety in that. Many people are trolls and just don't really have a good reason to be anonymous. Not that I think you necessarily need a reason to not give away your government name. But many people also live in oppressive regimes across the world, and may need to be anonymous so that they can do things like report news of what's going on in their country, or share their opinions that may get them incarcerated if the government knew who they were. Of course, I live in the United States, this is not exactly happening to me, but there's other concerns besides just anonymity. There's also data concerns. As I said earlier, Discord did implement this and still had a massive data breach of 70,000 users' government IDs. You know what's commonly used to commit identity theft? That would be your government ID, because they provide a lot of information. Your first name, your last name, your date of birth, and this specific identifying number that is supposed to be known by you and only you to verify that it is. In a vacuum, this is bad, but we don't live in a vacuum, and outside of a vacuum, it gets even worse. Because once that information is out there, it is really hard for it to stop being out there, especially in countries where it is very difficult to change your government identification number. In the United States, at least, it is extremely hard to get your social security number changed. They really only consider it if you've had multiple cases of your identity being stolen. And it seems like more and more websites and even governments are hopping on this idea of forcing people to give up essentially their most personal information, their key to identity theft, to a random website with security practices that may be rather questionable and basically unknown, but the average consumer wouldn't know anything about this because, well, if they're asking for it, surely they know how to keep it safe. There have been entirely too many times where this data has gotten out from even credit bureaus who are supposed to protect it. The difference is credit bureaus are under a ton of scrutiny for data they collect and the regulations they must follow to keep data safe. Social media apps are not under these same regulations. It's a lot more lenient on ways they can store your data and ways they can use it. I'm not even necessarily talking about sharing that data with third parties, which they can do, it's in their terms of service. I'm talking about security controls, like, where is that data stored? Is the data encrypted? Is the database encrypted? Is it encrypted in transit? Who has access to that data? For the people who have access to that data, how are their accounts protected? Do they need multi-factor authentication? How long is that data held on to? What encryption standards are even being used to encrypt the data? Are the computers that the data is sitting on regularly being patched? What networks are they connected to? Are any of them exposed to the internet? If they are exposed to the internet, what controls are preventing people from accessing the database? None of this is really regulated in social media the way that it is for finance or healthcare. With less scrutiny and less protections, more of these data breaches are going to happen, and I don't know if it's worth it. I do think it's important that children are protected in online spaces, but I don't think that means it's okay to endanger children in a different way, and also endanger adults who have to comply with these rules, should they not be allowed to participate in social media at all. This may seem like a silly thing to complain about. After all, Twitter and Facebook are not human rights given to you by the government. But the reality is, social media is simply how people are socializing these days. And it's not just for silly interactions, it can be networking for careers. It can be talking to your friends who live in different parts of the world. Heck, in the cybersecurity world, threat feeds are often on social media. Oftentimes I find out what's happening due to certain accounts reporting news. I can't access that without a social media account. Even most people find out about general news from social media these days. It's more than just a silly app to talk with people on the internet. Or post pictures of your fancy dinner. Or your vacation in Spain with the caption, "Take me back." And like I said, this has already happened before on a relatively small scale. If it becomes a global requirement, how many oopsies are going to be acceptable before we decide it's okay to regulate it? How many people are going to have millions of dollars stolen before we decide to do something about it? Because we're not doing anything about it now. And I'm not quite sure the average user of these websites understands the scale of what they're being asked to do. I've already somewhat accepted the death of privacy because we do allow many corporations access to so much of our data just completely willingly. But at the very least, that doesn't always increase your risk of having your identity stolen and your bank accounts drained. It just feels kind of creepy when you get a weirdly specific advertisement. Ultimately, though, I was pretty relieved to see the amount of backlash Discord got for making this decision. I use them pretty regularly, and if I ever have to verify my age, I'd just rather accept being stuck with child controls, or straight up find a different app than consider giving them my driver's license. The amount of risk in that, to me, is just not worth it, especially when I consider the ways my identity is already at risk. I really hope this kind of ends up being the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to the data we willingly hand over to different organizations. Though, maybe I'm being optimistic about that. But it really seems like people overall are very against it, whether it's due to just preferring anonymity or being healthily paranoid like myself. I don't necessarily see Discord going out of business anytime soon, even if they do end up making this move, but the amount of backlash seems like they've made them rethink things a bit. And I can only hope other social media sites considering this move have also taken notice of the backlash and have rethought their plans. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime. I know it's not quite my standard format, I just had a lot of thoughts marinating on the situation since I've heard of it, and I thought you might like to hear them. It may be me, but I feel like cybercrime reporting is getting a lot less good. I'm not exactly sure what it is about it, but I just don't see as many interesting cases in these past couple months that I used to. I'll still do my best to find a really interesting topic to talk about every week, even if it's something like this. Not that I want there to be any major data breaches or anything, I just worry that they're not happening less, and that instead, we're less transparent about them happening. Anyways, thank you once again for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime. My name is Chloe Tonis, and until next time, stay secure.